And then, as we just went through interviews yesterday, what are we most focused on? We're most focused on, one, they can handle the modeling. Two, that they are someone who takes ownership and pride in what they do. Because hopefully we made the point a couple times, which is the associate is creating the work and checking the work for a lot of things, and we ultimately check it, but less so than investment banking. So someone who takes pride and ownership in doing that, someone who has great communication skills. A big skill is how do you take something complex and nebulous and distill it down into 1 or 2 pages, and then walk somebody through that, so they can go from knowing nothing about the business to an hour later saying, this is a great business. We should spend real money and time.
I had a phenomenal experience at Blackstone. I would say, day one I showed up, and unlike every other person that they hired, I had never worked with EBITDA before, like ever. I'd never seen an EBITDA business. And the first model that I was assigned was, of course, an EBITDA model. And I didn't know what stock-based compensation, I didn't know what any of this was, right? And so it's I spent my first 3 days kind of frantically figuring that out. The nice thing about coming from FIG is you learn a lot of really technical stuff, and you learn a lot about structuring, but you're not going to learn. Once you've done FIG, everything else seems easy by comparison. So that was nice, but it was a little bit of a shock to the system when I first got to Blackstone. I would say initially when you're there, you're operating more like an analyst than you are. Your title's associate, but they want to make sure that you can do the bare bones of the job when you first show up. And so I spent most of my first 6 months kind of, probably 3 months, building models, right? They want to see that your knowledge of that and your ability to check the detail and stay on top of that stuff. They want to kind of make sure that that's solid, which makes sense, right? Because you want to make sure you have a foundation before you then progress. But the nice thing is they're kind of willing to give you all the responsibility that you can handle. And so my first real deal was actually a pretty lean team. So Blackstone, and you'll see this with the mega funds, they tend to have larger deal teams, right? So that's going to be 5 to 6 people, whereas I think historically deal team size, when you think about it, you think 3 to 4. And so my first deal at Blackstone was actually 3-ish people, so much on the much leaner side of things. And so I got to do a lot of really cool stuff. I got to, manage the bankers in that process. I got to manage the consultants in that process. I got to run the model. I got to interact on a regular basis with the management team. All the things that are the hallmarks of the fun parts of the job, I kind of got to introduce and layer on in addition to the technical analysis. The logistics of the actual recruiting process, it happens in 2 days. Right? So one firm kicks it off, and then literally over 2 days, 50% of the offers go out. And then over the first week, I would say 80% of the offers go out. And then there's a sort of a long tail. I used to say it didn't matter. If you'd asked me this question a couple of years ago, I'd have been oh, I never really noticed. But you do notice, right? I think it's funny because a lot of the friends that I've retained, I've obviously retained a lot of great male friends, but I've also my female friendships from these institutions have been so strong because they're a lot like me, right? It's people like people that are similar to them. And I have found, some badass women that just have taken a similar approach to life that I have. And a lot of them have just become and remained very close friends of mine. So I think that's number one, is find the people that you gel with, and you guys can work together to figure out ways to exist in a what's a very male dominated space, right? But at the end of the day, I think it shouldn't matter. You know what I mean? It shouldn't matter. Right, my mentor in life, who runs a very large, a Fortune 100 business.
All these businesses sound exciting. All of them sound great, but clearly not all of them are going to perform the same way. Not all of them are worth the same amount. And therefore you can't price them all the same. And so how do you know what to do, or how do you know where you want to put your capital and spend your time, is ultimately the key, right? And that's judgment. It's going to be informed by some of the fundamentals or the investment methodologies for the firms that you work with or work at, where they're going to help refine to you, what are the aspects now of a good business. So where therefore should we spend time? And then ultimately you're going to learn about price, and what's the right price to pay. And ultimately you take that with opportunity cost to say, where am I going to spend my time, knowing there are literally 200,000 plus privately held companies here in the United States. You're not going to look at all of them. And so all of a sudden you already have an opportunity cost set saying, how many can I look at and which one should I spend a lot of time on? And that's the investor mindset to say, what's a good business and what's a bad business. but focusing on today specifically, there are really two, call it, markets that exist for the use of debt here to help private equity firms finance leverage buyouts. And it's really based on the valuation of a business. So anything that's kind of, call it, large cap, you could put that at about $1.5 billion up. Those are businesses that likely have EBITDA, which is an earnings metric here that both private equity buyers and debt providers use to key off of for valuation and leverage stats. Anything north of $1.5 billion is a very big business with respect to credit markets, and so banks will help arrange financing for these private equity firms to say, here is where the market will bear for how much debt a business can incur, and we'll come to that in a second. And banks will structure those facilities. Generally speaking, it will be some type of senior secured term loan, which we can talk about what that means a little bit later. And it can be several different tranches, but they'll go to investors, particularly institutional investors who have private funds. Most of them are collateralized loan obligations. We can certainly talk on that chapter too, but they're distributing risk to investors. In businesses that have generally $1.5 billion or less of enterprise value, the market is actually a private market. And that's just really because the debt facilities themselves are smaller and there's less liquidity. And so they're not appropriate for those institutional funds who want to buy and sell those positions through those loan funds.
The mega funds, the big mega funds, are mostly buyout shops, right? So in that role, you're going to be an analytical engine, right? Just being able to build models and to go deep into companies, understand the issues. Like, these companies are massive companies and they're massive data rooms. So you're going to need stamina to go deep and the ability to communicate your findings quickly and effectively. That's doing modeling and due diligence. That's at the big mega cap shops. In the middle market, you could be in a highly concentrated middle market fund that manages north of $1 billion, but does 5 to 7 or 10 deals within the fund. Your role there is going to be similar to a mega cap associate, where you're going to be doing modeling and diligence, or you could be in a growth fund who have a slightly smaller fund, but they do many small investments. Your role there is going to be different. I think the characteristic there, yes, you're going to have to help with execution, like doing the modeling and the due diligence and the communication, which is right in the memos, but you might also be relied on more for sourcing in that role. And in some of these shops, and depending on the check size, the sourcing aspect is actually going to be more valuable than the modeling and due diligence aspect, just because the level of complexity of the company is not as high. But what is harder is being able to hit the pavement and find that company that's really attractive, that's really going to make money for investors, and being able to find that is going to be more valuable in that situation.
The other pocket of stuff that you do is, like, you found a deal, you're running at it, and like, it seems like, at least lately, like every process is super compressed and there's a really tight timeline because it's been a hot market for a long time. And so bankers are really driving the buyers to like get their work done fast and get to an answer quickly. And so that's a little bit of the same as banking. You're kind of keeping track of all the diligence questions you have, trying to make sure they're getting answered appropriately. You've got your advisors that are working on different things, you're coordinating for all of them, you're running the deal model, which is both like, more of like an operating model, so to speak, but also, you flow that through an LBO. How much money are you going to make based on the cases you've created? And as the associate, you really own the model, at least in the places I've worked. That's like your main responsibility, other than coordinating everything and helping make materials, is to really own that, make sure it's perfect, help develop the cases, make sure that they all work logically, that it manifests itself the way that you'd really expect it to in reality if these different things happen. And from more of a content perspective, I think this almost speaks to like the middle market versus bulge bracket kind of dynamic you brought up. It's like, you know, do you want to be working on some big like front page of the Wall Street Journal deal? You know, you're just like totally in execution mode to do that, super complex, tons of analytics? Or do you want to be doing like something where you're kind of like going around to different mom and pops with your deal team and trying to roll up an industry? Like there's been tons of these successful kind of buy and build strategy PE funds that have popped up over the years, and you can really make a good living doing that. So neither is right or wrong. It's just like, you know, what do you think you'd be more interested in? Those deals can be a lot less complex maybe financially, but you know, ultimately it could be more complex because you're dealing with a founder who doesn't know how to do accounting. And so like to do your diligence, you need to be like a little more capable of getting on the phone with that guy and help him figure out what you need and how to get it. So whereas like almost every deal you look at a mega fund, like you're dealing with incredibly sophisticated counterparties who like can get you what you need like without any problems, and you know may even be trying to like hide the you know the bad stuff from you, so you have to be able to dig that up and know that it's there or isn't. So I'd say that's more of like a totally analytics driven thing, whereas maybe the middle market stuff, you know, typically also is a little more career track, can be a little more entrepreneurial over time.